Alright, let's get into some character building stuff, some stat allocation. For new players who don't know how to build out their characters and what to do with all the points and the upgrades for their gear and stuff, I know it can be a little overwhelming. Frankly, I wish there was a guide when I first started, so I'm going to make it. And first thing you want to do is start off with at least a full deck of heroes with one of each. Think of those 4 heroes as your core set of builders, your 4 core builder characters. Now, on these 4 characters, you'll want to prioritize the builder stats, the defense stats. You know, you just want to go in on these defense stats, and you don't really need to sweat any of these hero stats on these 4 core builder characters. One of each, 1 Apprentice, 1 Huntress, 1 Monk, and 1 Squire. So, full hero deck to maximize the XP that you get for each match. Now, something else to consider is that you do also want to wear matching armor sets. Now, I know it can seem overwhelming at first. You just get dozens and dozens of pieces of armor. You're not sure who should get what or what's best for what. An easy way to help out with that is to just decide, you know, early on, my Squire builder is going to wear primitive armor, and my monk is going to wear minor armor, and so on. And just make that decision and stick with it. You'll get plenty of armor, so you won't need to worry about one piece being better than another, and you'll always want to wear matching armor sets because you get a 40% bonus on your stats for matching your armor. That is always worth it. You never want to go out without getting that 40% bonus for all of your stats by wearing matching gear. All right, that said, let's get into your Apprentice builder, your Tower Apprentice. We will want to specialize on the tower stats for this character, and early on, I think the best stat that you can invest in is range, because your range starting out at 0, it's not great. You know, you got to start somewhere. We can very easily improve that drastically, so if we put just 37 points into range, we will double the effective range of all of our towers. Now, I'm displaying it with magic missiles. That's the tower that you'll start out with, but this same principle applies to your flame bursts and your DSTs. I mean, you'll just get way more range out of them. If you simply put 37 points into range, that doubles the base stat of the base tower range out of the gate. It's safe to invest in it beyond that too, but there is a pretty sharp rate of diminishing returns. For instance, I have double the stock range here at 6.5 meters. In order to triple that, I'm actually going to need to put in 262 points just to triple it. Now, doubling it, only 37 points. Tripling it, going to cost you substantially more, 262. That's a big jump. You'll still want the range. I mean, the longer the range of the tower, the more weird stuff you can do. You can put them up in silly little spots and tuck them away, or you can cover multiple lanes with them. You do want to prioritize range early on. I dumped easily my first 50 or 100 points into range when I was leveling up and gearing up with my hero stats. I dumped them all into range, and I think that's a wise investment. Now, beyond that, you want to forget about Fortify. Don't level Fortify. We'll be using another character for walls, so don't sweat Fortify on your Builder Apprentice. Your elemental barriers, they're just not that good. Your Squires blockades are far better. So next, look to prioritize power and defense rate. Now, a good ratio to make all of your towers happy, because some of them like a certain ratio and others like a different one. It's 3 power to 2 rate will give you the best overall DPS for all of your towers. 3 power to 2 rate. That's a good ratio to go with early on throughout, you know, medium, hard, and insane, and into nightmare even. Your flame burst towers and your lightning towers, they prefer a 4 to 3 power to rate ratio, so a little more rate, but still more power. And your DSTs prefer a 2 to 1 ratio, so a lot more power than rate, twice as much power than rate. But overall, if you do 3 power to 2 rate, that strikes a nice balance between the two. And, you know, as you flesh out your builds and you get into the more endgame content, you'll start leaning on DSTs more. You'll probably go 2 to 1 then. But for now, in the beginning, do 3 power to 2 rate for the ratio of power to rate, and that'll do you just fine. So moving on, we have our Squire. Now, I would recommend that you go all in on Fortify for your Waller Squire. Just dump all of his points into Fortify and use them as a dedicated waller. It's best to specialize with your characters in this game, and you can always make new characters, so there's no reason not to specialize in this case. It's kind of the best bet in terms of progression and playing through the game quickly and easily. For the earlier stuff, you're going to get a lot of value out of having a wall or a squire and just simply dump all of his points into fortify. Now you can have a builder squire for some harpoons. Harpoons are a great defense. They pierce, they do physical damage. That's always good to have. A wall or squire is just going to be more useful early on. Apprentice towers are a little more diverse, a little more useful than harpoons. I would consider that a priority, having a fortify squire. A builder squire, you can just build like a builder apprentice. Harpoons kind of prefer the same ratio for power to rate as DSTs, deadly striker towers. So harpoons like a 2-to-1 power to rate ratio. You can forget about fortify on a builder squire too, and do that ratio for power and rate. And same principle applies to range. The range still scales the same way as it did with the apprentice. But I would recommend a waller squire for your first squire, all into fortify. So a waller squire and a builder apprentice can easily carry you through medium, hard, insane, into nightmare, well into nightmare. They will serve you well throughout your entire time with Dungeon Defenders Awakened, but I would highly recommend that you also mix in some traps and auras with your Huntress and your Monk. So for the Trap Huntress, we will want to prioritize Fortify early on. You'll notice that when you first start out with your Huntress, your traps, they just don't have very many charges. I mean, this one has 4 charges. Your Explosive Trap comes with 4 charges. It's not very much. Your Gas Trap, only 3 charges. Same thing with your Inferno and so on. So the charges are really low. If you start with 4 charges and you put them down on the field, they're not going to stay up very long. A small investment in Fortify, say 20 points, gets you 10 charges, more than double the charges. That's far easier to work with. You definitely want to prioritize Fortify early on a Trap Huntress. Now, beyond Fortify, once you're satisfied with how often you have to replace your traps and you're satisfied with their ability to stay on the field, you should prioritize power next. Now, power and not rate. Here's why. If you maximize the power, you get more damage per charge. So you're essentially elongating the life of your trap. You're getting more damage per charge. If you up the rate, you'll get more charges per second, and that will burn the trap down faster. So you run into the same problem if you prioritize rate over power. There's probably a ratio for power to rate like there is with the Apprentice towers, but it's not really worth emphasizing rate simply because your traps should be placed up against walls. They'll just be triggered constantly anyway, and you really want to get the most damage per charge so you don't have to repair them as often, and it'll be easier to keep them on the field. And just for that same reason, generally speaking, you'll want to build your traps up against a wall, so you also really won't have to worry about range either, generally speaking. Especially in the beginning, you should absolutely focus on Fortify and then power. Another benefit to Fortify is that it will elongate the duration on your Gas, Inferno, and Darkness traps. So for instance, the Gas trap here starts out with a 7-second duration. If we just go into Fortify a little bit, you can see that it increases substantially. Now we're at 15 seconds, more than doubles with just a small investment in Fortify. So definitely prioritize Fortify first and then go into power once you're happy with the health of your traps. As you're going through the game and leveling up and gearing up your characters, for your Trap Huntress, you will want to focus on pieces of armor that have all 4 builder stats, and by doing so, you will naturally come upon enough range and rate to not have to level them up at all, and you'll get the most use out of those stats on your traps just by having the bits that you get on your armor. Now, for the Aura Monk, it is probably best to start with range. You're going to want to start with some range because the auras have a really small range to start with, and this just isn't that useful. It's enough to cover a wall and a small amount of a lane, but that's not really going to do much good for you at this small of a size. So a little bit of range goes a long way, just like the other stats. Just a little range, let's say 20. And boom, way bigger and way more useful. You'll want to start with range until you're happy with the size of your auras, until they're more useful to you, until you're getting more out of them in your builds. From there, start going into Fortify. I would almost prioritize Fortify as much as range because your Strength Drain aura is going to be a staple to your builds. Strength Drain auras are going to help to keep your walls alive. They're going to strip elemental resistances. They do a lot for you, but they drain quickly. They lose health fast. So you want to up your fortify on your auras simply to keep them alive longer and help them last for a whole wave or two rather than having to repair them mid-wave. That's what you don't want. Same thing with your traps. You really don't want to have to run in and repair them mid-wave. You want them to last for the whole wave. So you want to keep adding fortify until you get to a point where that's possible. Now, once you have enough range and fortify to satisfy the health and size of your auras, that's when it's a good idea to start going into power, because power will also help to increase the damage reduction rate of your strength drain aura. The more power you have, the more strength that you sap away from the enemies, the less hard they hit. The strength of the enemies, it gets reduced, and that scales with your power stat. So power helps out your strength drain auras. It'll also add some damage to your electric auras too. Typically, you'll want to stress the power stat after you're satisfied with range and fortify. I wouldn't worry about defense rate on an aura monk, because generally speaking, when you're playing the game, what you'll find a lot of people do, and it's something you should do, is you build stacks of auras in this manner. So a slow, an electric aura, and a strength drain. Now, rate is going to help the damage, the DPS on your electric auras, but it's going to do absolutely nothing for your slow aura, your ensnare, and your strength drain aura. It's a low value stat. It only helps one or two of your auras. It helps the healing aura too, but I mean, who uses that really? You just don't get a lot of value for the defense rate stat on your aura monk, so absolutely prioritize fortify and range first, and then go into power once you're happy with the size and health of your auras. Now, that'll cover it for your 4 core builder heroes. Those 4 heroes are going to do a lot of good for you throughout your playthrough. You'll use them for the entire time you play the game, very, very often. But there are other heroes worth having, and I want to talk about them. Let's look at what I believe is the 5th character that everyone should make at some point. Going to really, really help you out in Nightmare, and that's going to be the DPS Huntress. Now, for the DPS Huntress and all of your DPS characters, you will want to level up the armor rating. 29% on 3 of the pieces and 30% on the 4th piece. That's going to help out with damage mitigation. You'll definitely want that because there's a cap. It's 164%. That's going to give you 90% damage mitigation in Nightmare and Massacre. That's the cap. You want that on all of your DPS characters. And for your weapon, you'll want to prioritize ranged damage, but also max out fire rate. Fire rate is always more important than damage. It always scales better with DPS, so make sure you max out your fire rate and then ranged damage on your weapon. For the stats, to allocate stats, the easiest thing to do, especially when you're playing through Nightmare, is just go all in on attack. It's easily the highest value stat for a DPS Huntress. Your damage is going to scale really well off of attack, and as secondary stats to look out for on gear, but not necessarily to level up on your gear, is going to be the boost stat and the vitality stat. I mean, vitality for obvious reasons, you know, a dead hero does no damage. Boost is going to help your boost skill out to deal even more damage with your Huntress, so you want to look out for vitality and boost on pieces of equipment as well, but attack is your main priority. Definitely go into attack on a DPS Huntress. Now, aside from DPS characters, I mean, there are plenty more you can make. A useful character to have, and probably what I would say is the 6th character you should make, is a boost monk. So there's a lot you can do with a boost monk. You can sit on a stack of towers and just hit your F key every 15 seconds, and now they deal double the damage. So it's a good idea to have a boost monk. Great for multiplayer, great for some AFK or semi-AFK survival builds. Very useful to have, and it's really simple what you do with the stats for a boost monk. You just dump them all into the skill stat. Skill, defense, boost. Not the boost stat, the skill stat. Just dump all your points into skill, level up your gear in the skill stat, not boost, and your boost monk will do a lot of good for you. So aside from that, there are other DPS characters worth having. I would say the next one to make, and one that you'll probably use in Massacre, is a DPS Squire. Now, I say DPS Squire, but who's doing the DPS? It'll be a DPS pet. So the Squire kind of is just a vehicle for the pet itself, rather than the Squire dealing damage on its own. You just go all in onto attack, just like our DPS Huntress. Again, 164% armor you'll want. I missed it by 1% there. All of the attack. Now, you know, vitality is a consideration, but you'll be blocking and you'll only be taking about 5% damage anyway. You block and you let the pet do the damage for you. That's kind of the deal with that. The pet I have on this guy right now is a steam robot. I'll leave a card of another video where I use the steam robot to farm some massacre loot in the Deeper Well hardcore. But anyway, that's the DPS Squire. Definitely useful to have. And another DPS character that's worth considering and building out is a DPS Monk. Very different from the DPS Huntress and Squire in that you do not level the attack stat. That's not the best way to go. The best way to go is to level the hero boost, the boost skill, and level up the fire damage or the lightning damage or whatever elemental damage on your weapon. Fire and lightning tend to be better. So level up the elemental damage on your weapon, max that out after, of course, maxing out ranged projectiles. Now, there is currently a bug that leveling up a ranged weapon, if you level up the projectile count, it displays next to the melee damage. It will go to the ranged projectile, so don't worry about that. But when you're leveling up your weapon for your DPS Monk, you should max out the elemental damage and the ranged projectiles. Now, you don't go into attack, you go into the boost stat primarily. And why is that the elemental damage will scale with that boost, that skill. So I'm doing 20k per projectile of fire damage here. If I turn on my boost, now I'm doing 60k per projectile. So it scales really well with your skill, and if you pair him with a genie pet, you have unlimited uptime on your boost ability. So very useful to have, very good hero to work with, and in Massacre you'll want to stack Vitality also, but definitely elemental damage on a DPS Monk. Now aside from that, there's a couple other utility characters we can think about having. First of all, if you want a Harpoon Squire, that's always good. Build out a Squire just like you would a Builder Apprentice. But something else to consider is why not having a Waller Apprentice where you focus on Fortify with elemental barriers. Now sometimes at the end of a build you have 1 or 2 DU left. What do you do with that? Well, you can build a elemental barrier, and if you want to maximize how good that elemental barrier is and maximize the use of that DU, just make another apprentice, gear him up with some Fortify. So that's pretty simple. It's the same as our Waller Squire. You just go all in on Fortify, and that's it. That'll do it for this guide. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's useful. If you want some really number crunchy details on some stats, I'll leave a link to the Google Doc put together by a couple of community members. I think it's Zaltenos and the Itch. I think it's how you pronounce it. I'll have their names on the screen. Big thanks to them for creating such a useful tool. But if you really want to dig into how stats scale and how some other things work and some other tools, check for the link in the description. But that'll do it for me. I just wanted to put together something comprehensive for newer players because it didn't really exist. At least I couldn't find it, and this is all stuff that I wish I knew when I first started and first got into building characters and doing some stuff, and I made some mistakes. So hopefully this helps to have some people avoid the mistakes that I made and provides a bit of a guide on how to make some characters, how to build out your characters, and get the most out of your stat points. So that'll do it from me. Thank you so much for watching.